Bryan Clark, director of the Hudson Institute Center for Defense Concepts and Technology, is joining us this morning. Thanks so much for being with us, Bryan. You know, there are a lot of headlines out there, and it can make Americans a bit unnerved. But is this should we read this as that the U.S. is somehow ill prepared for the future or losing ground when it comes to submarine technology?
Yeah, Adrienne, I don't think that it signifies that the U.S. is really losing ground as much as it is facing an increasingly peer competitor environment. So technological proliferation is sort of a natural process. We expect that over time we'll have to stay ahead of other technologies that nations are fielding. So, for example, China's fielding this new generation of undersea sensors that are going to be able to detect operations that we conduct underwater. So the submarines themselves are very quiet and won't be detected. But when they launch a torpedo or a missile or an underwater drone, they could be detected. So the U.S. is going to have to come up with ways to obscure those operations, just like we do above the water with jammers and decoys. And we'll have to think about longer range weapons that allow the submarine to maybe not have to get as close, to an opponent's sensor arrays before it does an operation. So this sort of move, counter move competition has played out in several areas over time. And the U.S. is just going to have to up its game on the undersea in order to remain ahead.
In terms of this underwater Great Wall, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so China knows that the U.S. has the quietest submarines in the world. They've been dealing with this problem for a long time. They would like to avoid having U.S. submarines interfere with an invasion of Taiwan, for example. So what they've been building is a set of undersea passive sonar arrays, kind of like the SOSUS arrays we used during the Cold War, along the South China Sea, in the East China Sea. Some of these are civilian ocean observatories that are being dual-purposed as military sensor systems. And they're also putting in active sonars. And so active sonars are just like a fish finder where it sends out noise and listens for the echo coming off of objects underwater and hoping to use those to find U.S. submarines because they're so quiet you won't hear them otherwise. So this undersea Great Wall they've been investing in for about a decade and a half now has started to actually yield benefits, apparently, and that China's starting to be able to build the sensor network, keep the U.S. from operating with impunity in these areas, and it's forcing the U.S. to have to rethink how it does undersea operations.
In terms of the number of submarines, it looks like the Navy won't hit its goal for the number of nuclear-powered attack submarines for another 25 years. And then I found this quote from General Anthony Cotton, head of the U.S. Strategic Command, saying Chinese ballistic missile submarines have the capability of striking targets on the U.S. mainland while staying near China. So what advancements in weaponry is being developed by the U.S. to counter all of this?
Right. So the Chinese are starting to get to the point where they can field weapons that are very much like the U.S.'s own weapons, where we can do those same kind of operations, launching missiles from close to the U.S. shore and reaching China. So what the U.S. is having to invest in is the ability for attack submarines and maybe even underwater drones to get close enough to China to be able to threaten those ballistic missile submarines. And this is something we did during the Cold War pretty effectively to keep Russia always guessing as to whether their ballistic missile submarines were always safe. The other thing the U.S. is investing in is more missile defense. So we're seeing a lot more emphasis on ballistic missile defense in the U.S. Defense Department, and new systems are coming online now that are going to attempt to defeat this kind of threat from China.
And certainly add that to all of the other things that we've been seeing with the phony police stations and the spy balloons, and really a very clear message from China to us. Bryan Clark, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.